My name is Megan Phillip. I'm the Executive Director of HC3, the Healthcare Council of Chicago. Welcome to our first summit of 2025. HC3 is a thought leadership and networking platform supported by Chicago-based organizations working together to drive meaningful change, improve health outcomes, and address challenges impacting our communities. We are proudly managed by Third Horizon as an initiative of this boutique advisory firm shaping the future of healthcare both locally and nationally. As we kick off our conversation for 2025, today offers us an opportunity to delve into urgent and complex challenges facing Chicago's medical safety net, informed by new data and strategic framework and reimagining its future. I'm excited to have such a diverse group of experts here and deeply grateful for all of your presence today. At this time, I also have the pleasure of welcoming a dedicated leader and champion of health and social services before we begin the formal program. Illinois State Representative Lindsey LaPointe has joined us, a friend to HC3 and a fierce advocate for equitable access to healthcare and social services. Representative LaPointe's work continues to guide and energize us, so I welcome Representative LaPointe.
Thank you, Megan. So good morning, everyone. We made it after a storm. We live in the Midwest and we are okay. We got here. I see lots of collaborators here in the audience. I see fellow healthcare policy nerds. I see providers in the audience. I see people who have or will spend their careers fighting for healthcare access for everyone. We are thankful for your presence today, and I'm grateful for the work that you do every day. We are here to, as this program was built, to hear about existential threats to the safety net system. But we are also here to talk about solutions. And I know that really it's the solution part of the discussion that got us here this morning, because we are reading far too much about existential threats every day in the news. So that's not what got us here. We came to talk about the solutions. For those of you who don't know me, like Megan said, I am a state representative and I cover much of the far northwest side of the city of Chicago. And since we are here talking about the healthcare safety net, I want to share with you that I'm also a licensed social worker, and I am also a former homeless street outreach worker. And I did that work of homeless street outreach before we had expanded Medicaid to cover what we call the ACA expansion population. And I will tell you that being out there on the street, working with people who did not have dependents, who were living unsheltered, who were in desperate need of health care, but behavioral health care front and center, was really, really difficult. And the fact that we are in a new world right now, where we do have Medicaid to cover that population, is incredible. It's fundamental, though. It shouldn't be exceptional, and I cannot imagine a world where we go back. I just can't. After 5.5 years as a state representative, I am really happy to be continuing to chair the Mental Health Addiction Committee in the Illinois House. Relevant to this conversation, I am also a member of the Medicaid Working Group, and some of you know what that is in Springfield. It is a bicameral, bipartisan group of legislators that contemplates most of the Medicaid issues and budget line items that we discuss in Springfield. When I was a rookie state rep about 5 years ago, I quickly learned that as a state policymaker, you cannot talk about healthcare without talking about Medicaid. I also learned that you cannot really talk about the state budget or take a thoughtful approach to that state budget if you're not talking about Medicaid. Many of you know that Medicaid is 20% of our Illinois state budget, more or less, and our state budget, just for context right now, is about $53 billion. You also, I know many of you know this, we can't talk about behavioral health or the social determinants of health without also really looking at Medicaid. Indeed, Medicaid is the biggest funder of behavioral health in Illinois. Medicaid is the biggest funder of AIDS care in Illinois. And Medicaid is also the biggest funder of long-term care in Illinois. We know this, many of us live this work out every day, but to hear it in that context when Medicaid is facing an existential threat is important. We have to think about it that way. I'm going to talk a little bit about some numbers related to the Illinois House for context. So as a state representative, I am one of 18 people, and each of us represent about 8,000 people. So I'm up on the far northwest side of Chicago, Jefferson Park, Portage Park, Dunning, Old Irving Park. So for me, of the 108,000 people that I represent, talk some numbers here, 33,000 of those folks are on Medicaid. And of those 33,000, 7,500 are the Medicaid expansion population that never had access to Medicaid until the ACA. So that's me on the far northwest side of Chicago. My colleague, Representative Paul Jacobs, who covers much of southern Illinois, including Carbondale and Cairo, of the 108,000 people he represents, 40,000 are on Medicaid. And about 10,000 of those 40,000 are part of the Medicaid expansion population. And then since we're here talking about the Chicago safety net, my good friend, State Representative Nick Smith, who covers lots of the south side of Chicago, he too represents 100,000 people. 53,000 of his constituents, as we say, are on Medicaid, and 15,000 of those are a part of the ACA expansion population. So just to put all those numbers in context, I think is really so. We are going to be discussing some existential threats to Chicago's safety nets. I'm going to start that conversation a little bit, but I'm really happy to be here to talk about solutions, so let me just put that out there. In state fiscal year 24, the state of Illinois had 772,000 people that were a part of that Medicaid expansion population, 772,000. So adults under 65 with no dependents. And as many in this room know, for that population, the federal government matches every eligible healthcare expenditure at 90%, so 90 cents on the dollar. But we also know that all of that is at risk right now due to really anxiety-provoking, I will say as a social worker, anxiety-provoking conversations and decisions being contemplated in DC. Because Illinois has a trigger law, if that 90% match drops below 90%, Illinois will then be on a 90-day runway, and if we do nothing here in Illinois, we lose that expansion population in Illinois. So what does that actually mean for numbers? I think many of us know exactly what that means for access to health care. But to put it very starkly, the federal government sends Illinois $7.34 billion every year as part of that 90% match for the Medicaid expansion population, $7.34 billion. And this has been in the media a little bit so far in the last few weeks, and it needs to be shouted from the rooftops much more. And again, for context, the state budget is about $53 billion. That is an existential threat if I've ever heard one. And it's a threat to healthcare access, it's a threat to the safety net systems and hospitals that many of you work in and lead every day, but it is also an existential threat to the state budget. And as I was taking the metro here, I was listening to an NPR story from a few days ago where the host was interviewing Kathleen Sebelius, former HHS secretary, and she said, make no mistake, what is being contemplated related to changes to Medicaid in DC will blow up state budgets across the country. And I know many of you know this. I know it's already keeping you up at night, and my goal isn't to make you lose any more sleep, but my goal is to be here and to be in conversation and to make sure we are all talking about solutions on the front end and doing everything we can to stay nimble and make our voices heard and be really clear about what those changes might have in terms of the work that we do every day in the Illinois state budget. So the last thing I'll say is, given the report that was put out by the Healthcare Council of Illinois in 2021, I'm going to state the obvious here, a lot has changed. A lot has changed. And just off the top of my head, when I think about, well, what has changed since 2021 in terms of our healthcare and safety net ecosystem? Inflation and the cost of goods that many of you live out every day. We have a new administration in the city of Chicago. That's a factor too. We have welcomed more than 40,000 new arrivals to the city of Chicago that all have healthcare needs. We continue to face a very pervasive healthcare and behavioral healthcare workforce shortage. And then we have the changes at the federal level. So there's a lot in flux here. So as far as I'm concerned, this conversation could not have come at a better time. And again, I'm just thankful for everyone in the room, but more importantly, thank you to the work that you do every day. And I'm really grateful to be here to listen to this discussion and to hear our leaders talk about some threats, but also what's ahead. So with that, I will hand it back over to Megan. I know we're going to get this underway.
Thank you, Representative LaPointe, for sharing those words, for your service and your advocacy. HC3 was founded 9 years ago, and I have had the tremendous privilege of leading that platform for nearly 6 years under the vision and guidance of one of its founders, David Smith. When I first stepped into this role in the fall of 2019, David and I had a conversation literally just in our office, just reading the news, and we were like, it's really weird that hospitals are closing. And at the time, it was Metro South and Westlake, which highlighted some of the deep-rooted challenges that were ahead for me and for us. Our first summit of this nature took place in November of 2019, followed by a virtual convening a year later centered around the publication and research in our findings in 2021. By then, as Lindsey pointed out, the world had changed dramatically. COVID-19 had reshaped our healthcare ecosystem and profoundly impacted our communities. Today, we continue to face significant socioeconomic, political, and financial headwinds that threaten the stability of our healthcare system. While the pandemic once dominated our focus, these challenges never disappeared. They have persisted and are now in our demand of full attention. That's why today's conversation is so important. It's a reawakening, a call to confront these challenges head on and work together for potential solutions. To share more about how we approach this, it is my pleasure to welcome my friend, my mentor, my boss, my colleague, David Smith, the co-founder of HC3 and the founder and CEO of Third Horizon.
All right, good morning. You guys all hear me okay? I'm going to start just by expressing gratitude on a couple of different fronts. One, to just all of you. Roads might be okay, but it's still a Chicago winter out there. It still kind of sucks. A little cold, ground's a little salty, but I appreciate all of you making the effort to be here this morning. This is, we've been trying to kind of figure out this post-COVID convening strategy because holding events and forums like this these days is a lot different than it was back in 19 or 20. And this is a topic that seems to have generated a significant amount of interest, at least compared to some of the programming we've done over the last year and a half. So it's really a testament both to the existentiality that Representative LaPointe pointed out, and then just the passion of people in this city to address that. So thank you for being here. Representative LaPointe, thank you for being here. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for the framing. Just in the 6 or 7 minutes you were talking, I had a dozen questions like I'm eager to ask you, because I was telling my team yesterday, we had a call talking just a little bit about the political environment, and the title of the movie kind of flashed in my head, Everything Everywhere All at Once. Right? And that feels like that's the world in which we're living. It's like everything that could possibly be happening, exogenous, endogenous, wherever, whatever, we're all kind of experiencing it at the same time, and it's uncomfortable. The other thought that I've had is, I don't know how many of you remember that moment in January, February, March of 2020 when you kind of realized, oh shoot, I don't really know how this COVID movie is going to end, right? I don't know when I'll be able to take off a mask or be able to go back outside, or when things will start to become a little bit more normal. I kind of have that same feeling right now. I don't know exactly how this movie is going to end, and one of the things that I think we're all kind of holding in our own different ways is that that's a hard thing to internalize. It's hard to not be in control. And it's hard to have so many of the things that matter so much to us being determined in places and by people that are very outside of our circles of influence. That being said, there are things we can control. There are things that we can do. And so one of the things we'll acknowledge this morning is that everything going on in DC and with this new administration, those things are going to occur. We should be activists around that. We should have our voices heard, to Representative LaPointe's point. As we start to see these cuts in Medicaid emerge through the spending bill that's now beginning to be introduced in Congress, we need to make our voices heard. because I will say that Medicaid is synonymous with our country's safety net, and it is under attack. Medicaid might be the single most important health and social program we have in this country, and we did an incredible thing for people all over this country a little over a decade ago in expanding its capacity to touch lives and help give people access to resources. But we have consistently and judiciously undermined that program by not adequately funding it, by not running it the way in which it could be run so we can maximize the dollar that really can have impact for communities all over the country. We started to think a lot about this, as Megan said, back in 2019, 2020, simpler times in 2019, where what we did was we released a document, a paper. This came a little bit later, but we did the analysis in early 2020, and it was titled The Challenging Future of the Chicago Safety Net. And the idea around it was to say, look, we've got a math problem in the safety net here that we don't seem to be taking very seriously. And the math problem is we have revenues that are continuing to kind of decline. The rate of growth is slowing, maybe even flattening for some facilities. And we have an operating expense structure that, just like every other part of American healthcare, is not tracking with that slowed revenue growth. It is increasing at a rate that is higher than that. And we see that in even more profound ways in the safety net, which we'll talk through in just a few minutes. So we said, great, let's take the retrospective look at what's happening with net patient revenue and what's happening with operating expenditures. Let's forecast it out 5 years and let's just see how bad it looks. And the answer was it looked really bad, right? It was about a $1.76 billion delta we were looking at between, at least at that time, the southwest and west sides of the city. Untenable, right? And kind of the idea was, well, this is a big deal. If I'm the governor, or I'm in the assembly, I'm an elected representative, I'm the mayor of the city, I'm gonna look at that and say, well, $1.76 billion, that feels like an unfunded liability. Where's that money gonna come from? Shoot, we ought to do something big and structural and do some reforms. COVID occurs, right? Terrible thing for the entire community for all the reasons that we came to know and understand. But our safety net in the city got what I'll just very euphemistically call a stay of execution. We saw funds fall into facilities, institutions, communities that we wouldn't have anticipated any other way. ARPA, the Inflation Reduction Act, all of the many programs that kind of went along with that. I mean, it was a moment in 2022 and 2023. I was talking to Safety Net Hospital CEOs and FQHC CEOs about some of the capital things they were wanting to do, or about consultants they were hiring to look at strategy and transformation. And it kind of felt like, oh, maybe we're kind of okay, until you look and you see that all of that funding was finite. And there was going to come a time at which that funding would end. And we would be back in the same economic configuration that our safety net has been in for decades, but particularly for the last decade. And that's the position that we're in right now. The paper that you guys all have, the two-pager, shows a couple of things, and I'm gonna kind of work a little bit. I didn't do slides today, but I'm gonna work from this just a little bit and kind of point out a couple of things. We'll use this as a bit of a reference. If you look on the first page at the bottom left graph, I'm not gonna read you the numbers. You can look at the arrow, and you can get a good sense pretty quickly on what's going on here. This is net income over the last 10 years for a cohort of 9 of the city's kind of 15 predominant safety net hospitals. Didn't include a couple of these in the analysis because they're either county-owned, state-owned, or our statisticians weren't comfortable with some of the financial reporting that we saw in the Form 990s historically. And what this shows more than anything else is that over the last 10 years, there has really not been a year where we've seen some kind of we haven't seen positive net income across the cohort of facilities that we studied. Now, in some cases, this hasn't been as dire. At the last minute, the state might come in and create an advance, or a bridge loan, or a grant, or philanthropy might come in and kind of help save the day. I'm on the board of a safety net hospital here in the city, and we've played this game for about a decade, right? Where the operating structure, the economic configuration of our institution is not such that it can break even or make money of its own volition. It needs some kind of exogenous, external help and support. And we've been able to kind of prop up a lot of these institutions. Some of them we haven't been able to, right? Metro South, Westlake, Mercy until Insight took it over after it was sold for $1. These were institutions that failed. A couple of them have some de minimis operations going on, but we left major holes in parts of the city because of our inability to address that. But we've kind of kept enough plates spinning to keep some of these facilities open. What the graph on the bottom left and the graph on the bottom right ought to indicate to you is that if the challenge was $1.76 billion a few years ago, we're now looking at a 5-year time horizon of a $2.46 billion gap. True to the graph at the bottom left, the compounded rate of that difference between operating expenditures and revenue, it's not closing. And there are no, so I'll just point you to the back and then I'll invite you to revert your eyes away from this in just a minute. There are no assets to offset that. Now, there are continued things that the state has done and can continue to do to help subsidize some of those losses. But when we're looking down the barrel of a $3.2 billion budget cut, we're looking down the barrel of the potential, to Lindsey's point, of an FMAP cut below 90% that might trigger a really difficult decision for the state. It is not inconceivable that in 2 or 3 years, this state is going to be dealing with multi-billion-dollar budget cuts that we don't know exactly how to address. Now, some of that stuff is a little bit beyond our mandate and purview this morning. We will discuss it when we get to the panel and the like. But what I want to focus on is the core nature of what's happening with the institutions in the safety net and the thing that needs to happen on the other side. So if there is a funding budgetary set of issues and dynamics, those need to be litigated, they need to be adjudicated, we need to pursue everything we can on that front. At the same time, we need a system ready and willing and able to meet whatever that structure is that can function in service of the communities for which it was built. And at the moment, even if we had the best case scenario, which in my mind is the status quo, what these pictures tell you, what these graphs tell you, what the data tells us, is that this is unsustainable. So this top graph on the back page shows the current asset comparisons. So cash, AR, savings, we had philanthropy in there, looks a little bit of the same, we took it out just for purposes of space. We've dropped from $425 million to $256 million. That does not count the significant liabilities that exist within some of these institutions. Some of these institutions have tens of millions of dollars in debt, accounts receivable, other liabilities that they have no way of repatriating or paying. So if you're a business owner, right? You were a CEO of a business or you had your own business, like a small consulting shop or whatever the case might be, you might look at the fundamental challenge here and you might say, okay, well, what are the things that I can actually do? Being on a board of a safety net hospital, Sinai Chicago, these are questions we've been asking ourselves for years. Hospitals would typically ask themselves one of a few questions. One question would be, well, can we do anything to shift the mix of our business? Can we actually get some more commercial clients in here, commercial patients in here that can help subsidize some of the operating losses that we're experiencing? Well, in most safety net facilities, the answer is no. There's not a lot of commercial contracts happening in that context. Commercial contracts tend to be in service of employer-sponsored insurance. Employers tend to look for networks and facilities and doctors that are in places that don't look quite like the south, southwest, or west sides of the city. The notion, the strategy of let's get a bigger commercial book of business, not tenable for the safety net. Well, okay, let's actually see if we can do something that negotiates up the commercial business that we do have and see if we can offset that. That's what hospitals have kind of done in the past, right? They've said, well, I'm seeing more Medicaid patients or I'm seeing Medicare and Medicaid rates stay stuck. I'm going to go bid up the commercial rates and stick it to the employers. Well, again, we have the same kind of dynamic and challenge. Maybe at best 5 to 10% commercial mixes in these businesses. These are not places where we're going to do a lot of commercial business until we actually see significant economic development in these communities. That is possible, by the way. That should be the objective. We're just a few years away from being able to realize something like that. Third thing I might do is I might say, all right, great. People are driving past my facility. They don't trust it. Doesn't have a great reputation. Some of my equipment's old. I need to hire some specialists, whatever the case may be. I'm going to make a capital investment. I'm going to go to the markets and see what I can get done. Well, if I'm a nonprofit, I can't really go pursue private equity or venture capital. If I'm a nonprofit that is struggling and I've got the balance sheet that's depicted on the back page here, I'm in a position where I can't really go to a lender. Social impact funding might be something I can do, but we're way past that for most of the facilities in this city. There's no access to capital. So not only am I in a position where I can't really offset and capture margin through commercial contracts, I can't even invest in the core structure of the business to make a different kind of value proposition in the first place. Okay, I could try cutting cost. My expenditures are out of control, I can cut costs. Well, that's not really a dynamic that exists in healthcare almost anywhere in this country, right? Medical cost inflation marches to the beat of its own drum. You have to have leverage to be able to control and contain cost, or you have to be able to introduce new things like technology to create efficiencies, which, by the way, requires capital, and I can't get access to capital. So the last thing I might look at is different sources of revenue. And we've been good at that. We've found different sources of revenue with philanthropy, with the state, through grants. We had the Healthcare Transformation Collaborative funding. We've been able to make these plates kind of spin. We're out of runway in being able to do that. The title of this little two-pager we distributed to all of you is Beyond a Call of Action. We are so far beyond the call to action kind of thing. And I'll use the same term Lindsey used in her opening remarks. This is existential, and I'll say it even more directly and more plainly. The current operating model under these current conditions for this city safety net will fail. It will not fail in 5 years. It will not fail in 10 years. It will fail in a matter of months or a year, year and a half. We will begin to see critical safety net hospitals in this city enter the zone of insolvency. And as you all know, when you enter the zone of insolvency, it becomes a self-perpetuating prophecy. The good news is there might be some things we can do. I know that sounded really bleak, right? Okay, now let's get to the solutions part. Let's talk about a few positives. There are a few options, right? Option one is always kind of the do nothing option. And I'm not going to beat that up because I think the math and the pictures and everything kind of shows that. I will just say one thing on the do nothing option, because this is going to have to be a team sport. Anything that we do here is going to require a plurality of different stakeholders, and I'll talk a little bit more about this at the end. But the do nothing option, the implications for that extend so much further beyond just a few hospitals in the city closing. It has an absolutely deleterious impact on the community itself, on the economic vitality of the community, the jobs that are granted in the community. If you're a Politico or you're somebody sitting in Springfield and you're attached or associated with that community, you have the political ramifications for letting something like this happen on your watch. There are political implications for these things happening. It's why we've been so intransigent in making big changes historically in the past. If you're a business owner in this city, if you're a health insurance company in this city, if you run an academic medical center in this city, this is not something that is economically tenable for your business, your family, in the same way in which it's not for that neighborhood. Everything that happens in a city like Chicago is symbiotic. What happens on the south side affects the Gold Coast. And we need to stop pretending like it doesn't and stop pretending like these problems and challenges sit in a monolith. There will be blood spilled for doing nothing, literally and figuratively. The second option we have here does look a little bit more to the state, right? It looks to the state and says, listen, you facilitate and administer the Medicaid program. We've got county facilities and state facilities in the state. Let's look to the state, the assembly, the governor's office for some leadership to be able to structure some kind of a reformed way in which we provide these services across the city and across the state. I don't believe the state can do that by themselves. The state is a massive power center. The state has the political, regulatory, and fiscal levers through which they can make some of these changes. But the state has struggled to be able to do this of their own volition over the course of time because our safety net is not, again, a monolith. It is federated, it is fragmented, it is run by a bunch of different institutions and organizations that create a bit of a Byzantine. There's a third kind of option, and this is going to sound a little bit like some soaring rhetoric, but I'm familiar of several different things happening in the city right now that kind of owes to this pathway, and that's that we conceive of some kind of a grand bargain here. And what I mean by that is that instead of looking to the state as the single source of power on which we need to rely to make these changes, there's other stakeholders that come into this and begin to give some things up in favor of having a viable, well-functioning safety net in the city. Grand bargain between the state, number one, the stakeholders who run these facilities, so Sinai Chicago, St. Bernard, Erie, Howard Brown, Thresholds, all of the other organizations that represent the safety net stakeholders. The third is what I would call the incumbents. There are major economic power centers in this city that the collapse of the safety net is not economically tenable for. HCSC, Advocate Aurora, Northwestern, Rush, Centene Meridian, University of Chicago Medicine. None of these facilities are built to support the kinds of needs that we have in these communities. They do support when and where they can. In my opinion, several of them could do a hell of a lot better than they do or have historically done. I don't think there's any question about that. These are organizations that don't have that capacity. They do have the fiscal means to bring some support, and they've got resources we don't have, namely being capital in these communities. So that third stakeholder that we need a grand bargain with is the incumbents. And I would say that the fourth stakeholder that needs to be at the table for some kind of a grand bargain is the broader Chicago business community, the philanthropic community. Philanthropy has been really good over the course of time. I think one of the challenges philanthropy has is there is such a demand for funding. And much of that funding kind of is going after one-shot kind of opportunities. Philanthropy is starting to say, okay, listen, is there a systemic approach we can be taking here? Is there a better way in which we can spend the philanthropic dollar and get a better yield out in the long run? I think corporates are looking for much of the same thing. Like, nobody doesn't know this isn't a challenge. Most people probably don't understand that here on February 13th, 2025, it's reached the level of existentiality that it has, but nobody is unaware, and nobody doesn't, like, most people don't not care. We just haven't provided a compelling enough thing that we can do. Well, what are some of the things we have been trying to do that have gotten a little traction? Well, we've seen the Healthcare Transformation Collaborative funding efforts. But that really has not been done in a way that's been overly sustainable. $150 million a year over the course of several different years. We've given out a lot of different money, and I am not knocking any HTC. If you're participating in an HTC in this room, God bless you for all the work that you've done in putting that together, securing the funds, and trying to move whatever that initiative is forward that needs to be moved forward. But we are not in one-off point solution fix territory anymore. We are in systemic overhaul territory, and anything that is done, money that is expended, whether it's privately sourced capital or government sourced capital, has to be hired to do a job for sustainability. And what that requires is a whole lot of different people in the mix than we have had before, because oftentimes what we will see is the FQ and a couple of other CBOs kind of conceive of this kind of an initiative. And that'll have its KPIs and it'll have its impact, but it's not systemic. Or the hospitals will get together and they'll do something, or the MCOs might have a meeting. We have yet to really see a massive citywide effort where the FQHCs, the MCOs, the hospitals, the community mental health providers, the community benefit organizations, and the other power centers in the state come into a place and say, okay, each of us are going to have to give up a little bit to get something here. That is what I mean by the grand bargain, in addition to some of those other groups that I referenced a few minutes ago. So also on the back page of this two-pager that we distributed a little earlier, we've put down 7 different things, 7 different elements that would require the consensus of those parties in some kind of a grand bargain. And I'm going to tick through these a little quickly so I can land the plane here and get you guys to a break. Consolidating safety net hospitals. And I'm going to actually take 1 and 2 together. Consolidating the hospitals and recapitalizing the hospitals. Now let me say what this is not. This is not code for we should close a bunch of hospitals. Takeaway should be each hospital in our communities should be hired to do the job it can do, that it represents the highest and best value to the community and to the system. So recapitalization might mean the divestiture of certain service lines. It might be a facility or 2 or 4 or 5 that uniquely focus on some part of the healthcare continuum, a dedicated behavioral health center, a dedicated maternal health for the perinatal experience of women in this city, focused with clinical assets uniquely on that, cardiology, endocrinology, these other critical services that hospitals provide that can't quite be provided in an ambulatory setting or an FT. We have capacity. The problem is that the capacity is way overextended by acute care beds, most of which we don't need as many of throughout the city, and not nearly enough of a federated approach to what each of these facilities can have in the first place. The other thing that we do with the other thing that can be done with the recapitalization is give these facilities an opportunity to re-express, to rebuild, either to do what Advocate is doing with Trinity and look at some kind of a teardown and a rebuild, or massively reinvest in the fascias, the structures, the HVAC systems, the diagnostic and imaging equipment, the kinds of things that patients need to feel good and safe in a community. I'm on the board of Mount Sinai. Some members of the community call our facility Mount Dinah. That's not a flippant, glib thing that they say. It is because, and it's not that we don't have incredible care in our facility, but perception is reality, and the perception is we're dealing with buildings and facilities and plants that are literally, when you power wash the outside, they are literally chipping away millimeter by millimeter over the course of time. I believe there is an opportunity to take these fragmented safety net hospitals, merge them together into a common system, recapitalize them, balance and reallocate clinical resources in combination with the incredible outpatient and mental health access we have in other parts of the city, and create a better integrated system of care. I'm going to jump to number 3, the managed care organizations. We'll talk a little bit about that later. We need to fundamentally rethink how we're paying for healthcare in the state of Illinois. I was on the phone with Brenda Battle yesterday. I can't remember exactly how she termed it, and I'm not going to flip to my notes right now, but she said something to the effect of, the Illinois Medicaid dollar is the weakest dollar in the country. It is absolutely the weakest dollar in the country. One, because even with our 90% FMAP funding that we're terrified to lose right now, we're not that great at the Medicaid reimbursement game anyway, right? What are we tracking, 47th, 48th in the country in terms of total Medicaid reimbursement for a state that has the expense structure that we do in the state of Illinois? That's a massive problem. That being said, the way we are administering care and reimbursing for services in this state leaves a ton on the table. Our efficiency with the Medicaid dollar that we do have is terrible. And a big part of that is because we don't have alignment between the state, the managed care organizations, and those men and women doing the work on the ground, and then ultimately the patients for whom they are doing that work for. We've created a very open, federated system. It's based on fee-for-service. We see volumes. MCOs do what they do to use utilization management techniques to try to stave their budgets. We see delays in payments. We see denials. We see prior auth. We see an administrative industrial complex in our safety net that is the creature of this depressed funding. There are payment models. There are different ways through which we can align the incentives, the motivations of a patient, of a doctor, of a mid-level practitioner, of a managed care organization, and the taxpayer to be in service of creating more opportunities for the community. The fourth, please don't roll your eyes when I say generative AI or emergent AI, because I was probably rolling my eyes quite a bit up until about a year and a half ago. What is emerging right now in health-based digital technology? This is not like the synchronous telemedicine kind of consults we were talking about a few years ago. The capacity to extend workforce, to create efficiency, to create more access points for patients, that technology exists right now. Now, going back to one of the challenges I enumerated a little bit earlier, we don't really have the capital to make the kinds of investments. Hardwiring systems of care for this, which we don't really have in the first place, requires capital, requires resources. But the technology is there, so this goes back, if we get to a grand bargain, there's part element of that plan, the consumer-facing digital tools and digital tools that will allow for better connectivity to and for patients and efficiency through the care continuum is possible. The fifth is the development of a specialty medical group that would be in conjunction or in partnership with an academic medical center in the city. We have some amazing colleges that do medical education. There are opportunities to create a medical group out of emerging students that are entering the workforce, where those colleges can be able to strike some kind of an arrangement with the students that they're servicing, and those students serve in specialist roles that can be available to the FQHCs or some kind of a consolidated medical system over the course of time. There are things happening on this front right now. This is an area where the state would need to get a little bit involved to make sure that the rates and the kinds of things that went to that medical group were sound, and we had the right care coordination, care management pathways associated between that group and everybody else. High efficiency networks that beneficiaries can select. At the moment, we leave everything in Medicaid as a little bit of a free-for-all. We do that to extend choice to communities. That's an important thing. We should be extending choice to communities. One of the challenges when you extend choice to communities in an environment where supply is constrained, where we don't have clear pathways for individuals to go access a specialist or an imaging test or diagnostic or whatever the case may be, is that we leave folks in the lurch and we don't have the resources to plug back into that system to help facilitate those kinds of referrals, care transitions, and the like. That being said, we have started to build enough infrastructure in the city that we can create coordinated systems of care that exist in parts of the safety net. We just haven't figured out how to organize the Medicaid program around those things yet. Most other states have done this. This is an opportunity for us to think a lot more boldly about the way in which we manage and administer the Medicaid program in the state. I threw on the seventh for good measure because it needs to be addressed. I've come to find out this is probably more of an uphill battle than is prudent, but medical malpractice laws in the state. We have the most litigious environment in the country. Medical malpractice is an important thing. It owes in service of protecting patients. That said, these insurance policies and the litigious environment through which we're operating have done a significant amount of damage to the safety net. It's one of those other areas that we can have an impact on. There's several different things that we've been working through with a handful of stakeholders that kind of come into this frame, but this is essentially what that grand bargain begins to look like. There are some really valid reasons for why something like this could work in the current moment. The first is that the environment is becoming, as Lindsey said, again, existential. Pain. Pain makes people do things they otherwise wouldn't do. The expectation of pain. The expectation of pain today is probably as acute as I've seen it ever. The technology being deployed, that's a huge boon. The incumbents having this economic interest in a viable safety net, that's a boon. The state's need for predictability at a moment in an environment where we don't know what's going to come out of DC, that's a boon. The new emerging tools and resources at a clinical level, pharmacogenomic therapy and testing, psychedelic-assisted therapy, AI, which I referenced a little bit ago, GLP-1s, like we have things at our disposal that if we could figure out how to reorganize the economics of the system and we could scale, we could actually have a profound impact in the community. And let me just kind of end with this before I get you to a break. That again, this matters because it's the right thing to do. Like we're gonna be having a massive culture war in this country trying to define all of the tenets around things like DEI and access and the like. I want to strip away the culture stuff, and I want to strip away all of the stuff, all of the altruism stuff. All of that matters a lot. But more than anything else, there is common cause here right now and what we should be aiming for. The aim should not be the status quo. The aim should not be the ongoing existence of facilities that are just open that can serve patients. We have those tools and resources to create a system that not only meets people where they are, but can lift them up. Health, that sacred, scarce asset each of us has, right? Some version of our health. That is the most important predicate to economic productivity, to growth, to the creation of wealth. There is no higher calling in a city like ours than creating access to the resources that improve a person's health. and their God-given potential to live at the highest and best use of what that potential is. And all of the downstream economic, productivity, wealth generative impacts that come with that. We shouldn't live in a world with the things that we have where we talk about underserved communities that are 5 miles from us, or an 18-year life expectancy gap between 6 stops on the red line. We're way past that. I know at the moment it's bleak. I know at the moment it's uncomfortable. It's scary. I do often at the moment kind of remind myself of what Winston Churchill once said about Americans, that we always get it right after we've tried everything else. And we are in a try everything else moment in the United States. There are things we can control in our city. There is a grand bargain, I think, to be had here. We're going to talk a little bit about that in the next section of this. I think for every person that's in this room right now, we all have about as big of a burden, an opportunity to pursue real reforms, voices, advocacy, the kinds of things that tell the stories in defense of our neighbors who really just want the ability to access medical care in the same way I do for my family, or that many of you do for your families. So thank you for allowing me to say a few words. We're going to take a quick break. After that, we're going to have a panel through which we will have representation from medical center, an FQHC, a community mental health center. I'm going to put on my Sinai Chicago board member hat, so we will have several of those different parties associated with that kind of bargain. We're going to talk through some of the things we're seeing, things we think are possible. I would invite you to think through things you want to talk about. We'll provide a few opportunities to do that throughout the course of that discussion. Okay, so we've got some really special leaders in the city sitting up here. I'm not just saying that because they're sitting up here and because I have to say that as a nicety. All 4 of these individuals are people I work with quite closely. You will not find, there are others just like them in the city, but there is a small cohort, I think, of safety net leaders that absolutely embody preferential care and prioritization for communities and families and their workforces over institutional or personal brand equity. That's 4 of the people up here who care a lot more about what's happening on the ground than they do about trying to guard, move cheese. And so we thought it would be a great way to have a solutions, a solve-based conversation. Really quick intros, and then I'm going to do a little housekeeping, and then I'm going to turn it to each of them. To my far right is Dr. James Brooks. He is the president and he's the CEO of the Lawndale Christian Health Center. If you've never toured Lawndale or visited Lawndale, you should grab Dr. Brooks afterwards and see if he's willing to show it to you. It really is we've got so many jewels that are FQHCs in the city. Lawndale is absolutely one of them, and some of the work and the vision that Dr. Brooks has is incredible. To my right is Rushil Desai. He's the president and CEO of Aetna Better Health of Illinois, which is a CVS company. Rushil has been a co-consultant on a lot of this work with me for a year and a half, brings some incredibly innovative ways to think about it from the perspective of the managed care organizations in the city. To my left is probably, both of them are probably individuals that the most of you know. Brenda Battle, who recently retired from her formal role at the University of Chicago Medicine as the SVP for Community Health Transformation and the Chief Equity Officer. She's continuing on as an advisor to the university and is doing some supportive work in service of some of the topics we're talking about today. And to the very far left is Mark Ishog, the CEO of Thresholds, who represents just an absolutely critical community mental health enterprise in the city that does incredible volumes and really incredible work. So this is kind of the waterfront. Again, I'll kind of don, to the degree I make editorial comments, I'll don my cap as a Sinai Chicago board member. For those that want to participate in the discussion, be gentle with me because I've never done this before. I have an iPad in front of me, and apparently what's supposed to happen is if you scan the QR code, it's going to take you somewhere and you can punch in a question, and then your question comes up here. So I'll make you guys a deal. If some of you will jump in and participate in the conversation through this, I'm going to do my best to grab the questions, integrate them into the discussion that we're having, which I think will be really important. So that all being said, I'm just going to ask every person up here, just starting with Dr. Brooks, to say a little bit more about the work that they're doing with their institution, some of the things they're thinking about, thoughts or reactions to what you've heard so far this morning, things keeping you up at night, how you're thinking about the current state of what's going on in the city. Dr. Brooks.
First of all, thank you for having me. My name is James Brooks. Let me see. I have to start off by saying I'm a resident of North Lawndale. I was born and raised in North Lawndale, the west side of Chicago. I'm also a pastor at a local church in North Lawndale, and also I get to lead Lawndale Christian Health Center. So as you can see already, I got deep roots in my community. Lawndale is we have about 75,000 patients that call us home for their primary care. We have about an $80 million budget. We're doing some unique things around addressing the social determinants of health or social drivers of health. One thing that many of you may know about is our farm on Ogden. My community, we do not have any grocery stores. So how we define health is community, right? And if the community is not well, then none of us are well. So we partner with the Chicago Botanic Garden, and we started the farm on Ogden. And from there, we have what we call the Veggie RX program. So our patients will have access to quality food. We also have a fitness center where we have, just like the Veggie RX, we have Fitness RX. So anybody with hypertension, heart failure, or anything like that, they can get a year free membership to our fitness center, so they take ownership of their own health. So we're doing a lot of unique things. We have a Green Tomato Cafe. One of my passions, though, is our recovery community and our Med-In program. I'm really transparent. I had a brother to die of a heroin overdose, and so when I see patients that are struggling with addiction, I'm reminded of my brother, and I want to see them get the help that they need. We have what we call PACE, Program for All-Inclusive Care of the Elderly, where we take full risk on keeping the elderly out of nursing homes and keeping them out of the hospitals as best as we can. So we're in a unique place, and we're doing some very innovative things. I like to say it's not because of me, it's really because of the community and really listening and responding to the needs in our community. Final thing I'll kind of wrap up with, we're in over 20 homeless shelters now. So one of our values is proximity, meaning that we go where the pain is. And so that means when patients can't get to us, especially on the west side of Chicago, we have doctors that will go and care for them in the shelters. So I'm thankful. I think some of the things that I'm concerned about that keep me up at night, of course, is our staff. I worry about our staff. Right now we have 750 staff, and I wonder, if Medicaid gets cut, what will it look like for our staff, especially the non-clinical staff? I wonder about the well-being of our staff. Why? Because they're my neighbors. Actually, to the north and the south of me, both buildings, we have employees that work for Lawndale. So these are my neighbors that I'm concerned about. And so the workforce is a concern. The other thing I have is, of course, the financial constraints. And we've talked about that. That's been addressed. Health information infrastructure. We've been very fortunate recently to upgrade our EHR to Epic. But it was a huge investment, $7 million it cost us. But in order to have interoperability, care everywhere, it was necessary for us to do it. But what breaks my heart is that we got peers, other FQHCs that can't afford to do it, and they would like to. So that's challenging. I want to just stress this, because I have peers, some of my peers, CEO peers are in this room, but there's a certain weariness among leaders that we don't really talk about it because we just carry on. We carry on and we do the work. And so that's one thing I think among healthcare leaders. There's but there's also this resilience. One of my colleagues, and I'll end with this, I sent a text out yesterday, and I was just like, hey, what are some of the things, how would you summarize where we are now as FQHCs? And she wrote, uncertain but resilient, current conditions forebode a level of change that might yield a less than optimal environment. Our mission, our impact, however, are unwavering and undeniable. As such, we will adjust and we will persevere. That's what all of these leaders up here, and I know our F leaders are resilient, and we're committed to going and fighting until the end.
Thank you. That was, just as we pivot to Rochelle, I just wanted to share the quick thought bubble I've had in the last handful of weeks. The business that I run does work across the country. We work with other health systems that are not safety net institutions. And so you're talking about hospital system CEOs that command multi-billion-dollar organizations and huge budgets, and they're kind of flying high in a bit of a different way. I would take Dr. James Brooks or Dr. Lee Francis or the leaders we have in this room and in this city over any one of those CEOs running those big organizations, because they have more grit, resilience, care, and compassion for their teams and the community. They have the stuff of real leaders. And we have them here in the city. And I think the way that you wrapped your comments there were so apt, because it's emblematic of what you have, Dr. Brooks, and what you bring to Chicago, and what so many others do. Rochelle, what are some of your thoughts and reflections this morning?
Hard to follow that, Dr. Brooks, but that's why you're first. So Rochelle is, I'm the plan president and CEO for Edinburgh Health of Illinois. We have about 400,000 lives today across the state. A significant portion of that is on our west side and south side of our Chicago population today. I think coming into the managed care space, which has now been quite a bit of time in Chicago, and with that now for the last 5 years, we really came in to look at it a little bit differently. We wanted to think about the synergies between payers and providers. I think when David and I started these conversations, a lot of what we talked about early on was economics, right? And it's an interesting time for insurance with everything happening nationally, right? We know there's a lot of focus, prior authorization. We know there's been some things that have happened at United in New York, recent events. And it's brought this dialogue really to talk about how can we do better in healthcare. And I think we have a rather challenging system with the way it's been structured, and safety nets today, our focus today is just tipping point of kind of where we're at. But I think when we look at managed care today, when we look at what we're looking to do, Aetna specifically is thinking about that value-based care component. We're thinking about the community synergies of bringing in partners from the FQHC side, from the hospital side, from the safety net side. We have common goals here. We want to get to better health outcomes. And from my vantage point, as I look at the city of Chicago and what we've gone through COVID, the acceleration that we've seen on the digital front, technology front, this is a resilient city. It's a resilient state. We do have the right leaders, the right assets, the right organizations here to help bring that change at a local level. And healthcare is local, right? And we have to, we cannot forget about the patients and the members that are the center of everything that we do here. And fundamentally, these are folks that are re-engaging with the healthcare system right now. There's unprecedented utilization happening across the country, but happening also in Illinois today. And I think a lot of the conversations that we're looking to have today really involve us thinking about this differently. So when I think about the role of managed care, I look at it as a collaborative approach. We've got to bring in the right entities together to think about the right models of care. Of course, APMs and value-based contracts, wonderful buzzwords, but they've got to be foundational to those conversations. But I think a lot of what we hear and feel and see today is that there's billing issues and prior authorization issues, and some of these things are process-based guidelines and things that are set at a federal level, at a state level, and we've got to think differently. It's not about a person getting an A1C test done. It's about getting somebody to lower their A1C that's a diabetic. And I think each of the organizations in Chicago, whether you're an FQ, a PCP group, an ACO, a hospital, a behavioral health, a CCBHC, we're thinking about how do we all bring in those different assets. And Dr. Brooks touched on some of this, but health equity, it's the foundation of it. Health-related social needs. We collectively know that if we can go ahead and bridge that gap, do more closed-loop referrals, we get better outcomes of care. So what motivates us at Aetna today is that we want to transform the way we deliver care. It's not just being a payment mechanism. It's not just about claims and prior auth, and we can do better. You're not going to get any pushback from me on that. But we know that we have to be thinking about our population at a local level. We've got to think about the interoperability. We've got to be thinking about how do we bring in and bridge CBOs, providers, and payers to really wrap around that member to get to better care outcomes. So back to you.
I was in a meeting within the last few days, and the discussion was getting a little bit heated, talking about some of the historical challenges of the safety net, and somebody kind of blurted out in the course of the meeting, you know where this all went wrong was when we started the managed care program in this state. And there's certainly challenges we've had with the managed care program, but it's almost like we hired the managed care organizations to do a job. We didn't really create a framework under which that job could be done in a ubiquitous way that really had fidelity to patients in the communities. And then when it all went south, we started pointing our fingers at the MCOs. If you look and you audit the healthcare transformation collaboratives that have been funded over the last couple of years, and again, I'm not being denigrating to what's been done, show me how many of them have MCOs involved. How can you possibly have any kind of sustained systemic change that can last longer than the grant period without the MCOs at the table? The MCOs have a lot of work to do like everybody else does, but we got to stop doing this and have these cross-sectional collaborative conversations. So I'm grateful for Rushil being here and for the contributions him and Aetna are making. Brenda.
So as you mentioned earlier, I recently retired from my role as SVP at U Chicago Medicine, but I've spent my entire career, 43 years before retirement, working in marginalized communities and really working to close the gaps in health disparities, whether I was working as a nurse or in government affairs or managed care, which I spent about 20 years of my life in, and 10 of which was in Medicaid managed care. So when I think about the healthcare delivery system in Illinois, I think about all of these components: where health is being delivered, how health is being financed, how the socio-determined drivers of health are being addressed. You know, how do you take a dollar and really use it most effectively and most efficiently to ensure that the end user of care is getting what they need? So I think about all of this, and all of these things keep me up at night. I'm worried about every aspect of the healthcare delivery system in Illinois. And I've seen healthcare delivery systems function much more efficiently than what I've experienced in the last, since 2014 and prior here in Illinois. So I worry about how we're going to collectively create a system that is going to sustain care, particularly in this current environment, when we know we're going to have Medicaid cuts, and we know those Medicaid cuts are going to impact Medicaid funding in our state, and that's going to be passed through to the payer or to the user or the provider of care, and ultimately to the user. Those things keep me up at night. But there are opportunities to correct, readjust, and David, you mentioned some of those this morning, and we've been in numerous conversations over the last several months talking about these things. So those are the things that keep me up at night. Those are the things that worry me. I think there are opportunities for us. We're gonna have to make some really hard decisions. Everybody that is a stakeholder to healthcare in Illinois is going to have to make a hard decision in order to keep delivering care to the individuals that are most vulnerable in our state. And what we have to recognize is that if we don't, the cost of healthcare is just going to continue to increase. I heard some data from Jay the other day, Jay Bott at Deloitte. Deloitte did a study, and they estimated that the cost of health inequities, the health disparities that we'll see if we don't address the healthcare delivery system vastly, will increase from $300 billion in 2021 to $1 trillion by 2040. So that is significant cost, and that cost is going to have incredible impact to the decisions that are made at our state level and the decisions that are made at our provider level, decisions that are made with managed care, because folks will start making decisions based upon how healthcare is being financed. So we have got to pull out all of the efficiencies that we can in the system that we have and create a cost-effective, efficient system that will work and keep providing care. These things worry me to death because I know the end result of not doing this is death. So that's what keeps me up at night.
I know. I was going to say something. I was like, I better not. I better just let Mark go.
So clearly Brenda is not retired, just rewired. So she's in her rewirement phase, not her retirement phase. Lord, I love sitting next to you, and your energy just, but I'm not going to start out with death, though I will get there. So I will start out, too, that I was born and raised in Chicago. So 61 years in this fine city. And in fact, I was born at one of the safety net hospitals that we may talk about. I love Holy Cross Hospital so much. So thank you, Dr. Ezike, for your friendship personally, but for your leadership of Sinai and Holy Cross. And forever grateful. I spent way too much time after my birth at Holy Cross Hospital because many accidents at Marquette Park resulted in me walking across the street myself to the emergency room at Holy Cross. And part of my why is running Thresholds for the last 13 years. Like James, I lost my little brother to mental illness and substance abuse. And no 29-year-old, no any age-year-old, but no 29-year-old should die in a bathtub with a bottle of vodka emptied into him. And, was it the mental illness that drove the alcoholism and death at 29? Or was it the alcohol that, it's never really knew. Part of the reason I came to Thresholds is because I kept thinking, God, if I had known about Thresholds or something like Thresholds when he was 24 and 25, my little brother Eric, who was also born at Holy Cross, might be with us today. So that's a huge part of my why. Thresholds is one of the oldest and largest mental health and housing nonprofits in the city. We've been around for 65 years. Our motto is home, health, and hope. That really says it all to me. I love that it starts with home, even though we're not going to be talking a lot about housing today. Without a home, without safe, affordable, supportive housing, I don't know how we address the safety net system here in Chicago. So a big part of what we do is around housing. We provide psychiatry and therapy and counseling and case management and employment and education, the whole 9 yards, to about 10,000 people a year, 5,000 of whom have very serious and persistent mental illness. And our model requires us to go to them because people with serious mental illness don't come to us. Maybe they come to your hospitals and emergency rooms, and maybe they show up at the FQHCs, but mostly they don't. We have to go to them, and so our model is intensive community outreach wherever they happen to be. If it's on the street, if it's at Starbucks, if it's at a hospital or a jail or prison, we go to where people need us. And we've made collectively, not just Thresholds, but collectively, I think the system has made so much progress in the last that we should celebrate that, because we're going to talk about a lot of bad things and then about solutions, but we've really made such progress in the last decade, maybe longer, in fighting stigma and discrimination, and I'm so proud of that. We've moved thousands of people collectively out of institutions. People have been warehoused in Illinois in nursing homes and what are called SMRFs now. They used to be called Institutes of Mental Disease, Specialized Mental Health Rehab Centers. Thank you, Representative. But moving people out of institutional settings into community settings where they can live and thrive and recover. We have created a national model called Certified Community Behavioral Health Clinics, of which Thresholds has 4. It's a funding and service model to make us look a little bit more like our FQHC partners and create a funding and payment mechanism that we hope will sustain us. And the list goes on. Peers, people with lived experience now probably represent 2 people of our 1,300 workforce, people with mental health and substance use challenges. So making sure that peers, people living with mental illness and substance abuse, are running our programs because their voices are so important to those that we serve. So I'm really just so proud of everything that we collectively have done. But our sector is at high risk. And sometimes the mental health and behavioral health sector is not even included in discussions when we talk about the safety net. Hospitals and FQs, huge partners and serve millions of people. And so might we serve less? Yes. But the work that we do, as you all know, is so critical to the success of our folks in primary care and into our integrated partners in our FQs, et cetera. So really quickly, and then we'll move on, sort of what keeps me up at night. I've been doing this work for 40 years. In some ways, I feel like I was born for this moment. I started as a grassroots community organizer and whatever. I got the work that I do now. But this 40 years of nonprofit, I've never experienced anything more challenging in my 40-year career. And I'm not quite close enough to retirement yet, though. I really feel like this moment, we need to step up individually and collectively like never before and figure out how we're going to build coalitions outside of our normal coalitions. I love our coalitions of health and housing and other providers, but we need to be thinking way more expansively about how we organize and how we organize outside of Illinois and in downstate Illinois, because mental health and health is not a red-blue state issue. It is not a Republican and Democrat. This is about all of us, and we have to figure out how we're going to work together. The funding freeze was sort of the canary in the coal mine. We did a lot of press and really got our message out there. That was good, but it really showed us what is going to come. We stopped that, but I don't believe that we stopped it because people in Illinois raised our voices, though I'm really proud that we did. I think the governor of Kentucky and Arizona and Mississippi probably called up and said, this is not acceptable. This is going to kill us. We don't care what you do in the blue states, but this is going to hurt us. So that's why I'm so convinced that how we organize over the next couple weeks, months, and years is going to be so different than we've ever done before. And I'm just going to end this part with a quote. I happened to be at Equality Illinois, an LGBTQ rights advocacy organization, on Saturday night, and everybody was there, and the governor, the mayor, and the governor, who got several standing ovations, and I'm so proud to live in the state of Illinois, always, said something to the effect, we will love each other, and we will fight like hell. And so that is how I am approaching this, as I think I've always approached the work, but especially today, we will love each other, and we will fight like hell for those that need us the most. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. There are so many different places to go. Thank you. I have 4 questions in. Just as a reminder, the QR code is back up there. If you want to make a comment, I'll try to read it off. Other questions, great. I am going to go a little off script here, guys. I warned you that I probably would. Brenda and James, I'm going to start with the two of you, and kind of in different contexts. Maybe Brenda, I'll start in your direction. I don't recall if I said this as expressly during my opening remarks, but I ardently believe that if something transformative doesn't happen, big, structural, transformative, grand bargain, whatever you want to call it, in the next 18 months, we will see 3 to 5 hospitals fail. I think there's 2 things I want to ask you here. One, what are the implications of that? And I know that's more admiring of the problem, but I think it's important to understand what the implications are for other healthcare providers in the community. The second is, I can't help but wonder if part of what we need to collectively get better at in the next few weeks and months is storytelling and trying to connect what's going on and why it matters. One of the questions that came in, great question, what ways can we further contextualize the real ramifications on other folks when we lose expanded Medicaid? I could expand that question to a bunch of things. There's a story to tell there. I don't know that we know how to tell it, so would love your thoughts.
Yeah, so the implications are, first of all, this is about the sum of us. The safety net, we can't lose the safety net in Illinois, Chicago, and not have the other institutions that are better resourced be impacted by it. And here are the ways that they are currently impacted by what we already have today, but will be further impacted if any of the safety nets close. Right now, most of the larger institutions have really high, and even the safety nets have really high levels of ED, emergency department utilization. And the emergency department is really packed with folks who, if they had access to primary care, or if they were getting care at primary care or getting care at safety net hospitals where primary and secondary care or they're much more qualified to deliver that care, that they wouldn't have to be at these EDs. So the ED capacities of these hospitals are already at levels where folks are coming in and waiting for a day sometimes to get care because they're waiting in the ED. That's going to increase. And it's going to delay care for individuals. And we're seeing people leaving the emergency room after sitting there for 18, 20 hours without being seen, going back out, trying to get care at another hospital emergency room. So you're going to see more of that because they're going to lose the access to emergency department at the safety net hospitals, which some of them see 30,000 folks a year in their emergency department. So that's a really high number. So you're going to lose it. So that's what you're going to see. That's the one thing you're going to see. And then you're going to see the capacity, the inpatient capacity of hospitals who are better suited to serve individuals who have complex healthcare conditions, chronic diseases that are super duper complex. So academic medical centers, their care delivery is mostly centered around what we call tertiary and quaternary care. These are the highest levels of care. Individuals needing that level of care, regardless of who the payer is, those beds are going to be occupied by individuals who have what we call primary and secondary care, untreatable diabetes, things like that, that should be cared for at a safety net hospital. So we're not going to have capacity to take care of the needs of individuals who need care delivered to them in our city. So those are the impacts that's going to have on the broader system. The primary care, and I'll let you talk about that, James, what the impact is going to have on the primary care. I'll talk more about the hospital systems and what's going to happen. When we don't have capacity, because there's only a finite number of beds that are available to take care of patients, and while we might not need every acute care bed that we have, we need some of these acute care beds. If these acute care beds close, then we're in a position where we just can't take care of individuals. And what happens is when people do need care, they're seeking it at the most acute, most chronic level. When they delay care, all of the things that happen that result in the worst outcomes, and those are the things that drive up the cost of care, if we're worried about the cost of care. And so these are the impacts that we know we're going to see. We're seeing it right now. Let one of these hospitals close on the south side or the west side. Never let 2 or 3 of them close, and people will not get care. And primary care won't be enough to take care of the needs of individuals in our community.
Thank you, Brenda. Dr. Brooks, I'm going to frame the question, the same general question, but just a little tweak on the framing. I think it was yesterday or the day before it was announced, this came in from the audience, by the way, Heartland Health Alliance is ceasing operations, which is devastating, right? This is an organization that's been around, I think, for 40 plus years. And if part of what I'm suggesting is appropriate to think about is this grand bargain kind of thing, there is an interim period here where there is enough financial duress that I don't think Heartland Health Alliance, or like we talked about with the hospitals, like we are going to see some challenges. You stand in the breach on so many different things. What are organizations like Lawndale or other FQ doing when that happens? What are the implications to you when others go through this level of duress, suspension of operations? And any thoughts as a pastor on the storytelling stuff?
Yeah.
Amazing too.
I'll get right to that, but if you'll just allow me to just tell this one quick story. I do a workshop, do a lot of workshops, but about 2 weeks ago I did a workshop, and one of the questions that I ask is, name a scar on your body, and tell me about that scar. And most of the time, people don't tell me exactly about that scar. They tell me the story that's associated to that scar. And this young man, he pulled up his shirt. I got nervous for a minute, and he just showed me. He said, "Hey, I was shot here, and this is where I was shot." And then he went on to tell me, and they rushed me over to Sinai. And he said, "I'm so thankful for Sinai because if it wasn't for them, I probably wouldn't be here." So I think the narrative sometimes, and it makes me angry. And we've heard, what they call Sinai. But actually, the survival rate at Sinai is one of the highest in the country. That's the real narrative. And if they were to go away, and I'm so glad when institutions escaped North Lawndale in the 60s, Sinai stayed. Sinai stayed. And now to have my sister, Dr. Ezekiel, leading it, man, I'm so grateful. The Heartland situation is a heartbreaker because, like Lawndale, we're one of the 2 Qs that really focus care on those that are unhoused and experiencing homelessness. So we've been scrambling. We've been on calls with several of their providers. We've been working with Access Health. Heartland was more in the Inglewood South Side. We're more familiar with the West Side. But even Rush was on a call the other day with our CMO. So I think in moments like this, it's time for us, like we're doing right now with closing. It's time for us to come together, and it's not a time to point fingers, but it's a time to really lock arms and say we got to work this out together. I believe the impact with the financial downturn, if Medicaid were to get cut, the impact on FQs. One thing I love about community health centers, and I don't think when people think about health, they often think of the hospitals, rightly so, but FQs are embedded in our communities. And that means a lot of our patients, I wish I could give you the exact percentage. Sherry, you may know, they walk to our centers. We're proximate enough. We're in the neighborhoods. So could you imagine us going away and those patients that can't walk already, okay, I'm gonna get preachy, already we don't have grocery stores. Already Walgreens and CVS has left our communities. Now, if a community health center leaves, then that would be devastation to our community. So that's how I summarize it. We need our safety net, all of us together, hospitals and FQs, working together like never before and standing together, thresholds standing together to make a difference, to fight.
David, I just want to say one thing about the communication question. So on the day of the funding freeze, when I got up at 4 o'clock, as I always do, and read the newspaper, I'm like, what is happening here?
I'm sorry, what'd you say?
I said, what the heck is happening here? My CFO at like 5 o'clock in the morning, and I'm like, go into these federal websites, get our money now before we can't. Well, even by 5 o'clock in the morning, it was too late. So we couldn't access money that was owed to us. I mean, it's like for services rendered and money that we were collecting. Millions of dollars through HUD and SAMHSA, HHS, et cetera. I think there were 3 websites, Veterans, the VA, for our Serving Veteran Family Program. Couldn't get any of our money. And so I just made a decision at that moment, I think as Rahm maybe famously said, or some politician, don't let a good crisis go to waste. I decided I just need to be out there and be on every single talk show, television station, whatever, anybody that would listen to the story. Because it wasn't just about the funding freeze. It gave us an opportunity for 36 hours to tell our story and what we do and how it saves lives with real stories about real people. And I think that is what we have to do on steroids over the next couple weeks and couple months. Nobody wants to spend money now on communications or PR. To not invest in this storytelling right now would be a huge mistake. And all of us have stories. If you run a hospital, if you run an FQHC, a community-based or community benefit organization, I love that. I've never used that term for CBO. I will never think of CBOs in the same way, so whoever said community benefit organization, thank you. Or trade associations that you run, or if you're in government, this is the time to tell our story. So whoever asked that question, thank you. We cannot be silent, and there's so many ways to tell our stories.
Rushil, when I started working for Governor Leavitt way back in the day, I attended one of my first jobs was to staff him at a speech. I probably told you this before, so I'm just telling everyone else. And in the speech, he said something that really inspired me for a number of years. He said, we're 25 years into a 40-year journey to transition payment in American healthcare to a value-based care model. I was like, oh, that's great. I got here right in time. 15 years to go. I can be part of sprinting across the finish line. Worked for Governor Lovett for 8 or 9 years, staffed him on a speech during one of my last weeks at Lovett, and he got up and he said in his speech, we're 25 years into a 40-year journey to transition to value-based care. About a decade later, the question that came in, I think it's so apt. It seems we've been mentioning value-based care for decades with little to show for it. What do you see as the biggest barriers locally? I think it's an apt observation. I can think of a bunch of historic barriers. I don't know that we go into that as much as what can we do to break some of the barriers right now? What can we do in a grand bargain and how we organize payment systems that work better?
Yeah, so I think when you look at that, fee-for-service is a volume-based business, right? I think with that comes prior authorization and all the pain points and all this administrative burden. I think we're at that tipping point now where we realize across the whole healthcare continuum that we've got to change things. Aetna today has 60% of their membership today across FQs, safety net hospitals, behavioral health organizations. We do value-based agreements, and that varies. And I think the key for us, and when we look at that problem overall, is that there's a few different areas you got to start off with. Data's key. I mean, as a payer, we get a lot of that information. Not every FQ hospital system has that capacity to figure it out. And, you know, from a population health perspective, we know 5% of the population is driving most of the utilization across the board. Those are people that are hard to engage in Medicaid. Those are people that are not going to the FQs. Those are people not going to the PCPs. Those are the people, you know, we have a member that goes every summer, will go to Cook County Health just because he can get a meal and air conditioning. And that's where health-related social needs kind of kick in every single time to think about how important health disparities are for us to solve for. So I think for us, we've got to have the conversations and bigger picture realize what are we both looking to achieve as a payer and a provider. Oh, we want to actually reduce total cost of care, and the economic model there is there's cost savings. If we can get people out of the inpatient and ER setting, Brenda touched on the importance of that, and we can go ahead and get them over to the PCPs and help them with drug adherence and get them on their medications, they have better quality of care outcomes. If we solve for health disparities and get that member a meal, a housing, a job, we work with Sinai today to build our community health workers locally to find those members, right? That's building the workforce. Those investment opportunities allow for more dollars that sit above and beyond fee-for-service. Last year, Aetna paid $19 million on top of fee-for-service to all of our value-based organizations across the state. Those are safety net hospitals, those are FQHCs, those are PCP organizations, and behavioral health organizations. Now, we're one part of the overall puzzle here, right? And every MCO does things a little bit different. But as we think about this more broadly, it's data and it's investment of resources too. For us, when we talk to a Sinai versus a Lawndale, there's different needs. Sometimes it's more technology oriented to focus on hypertension and remote patient monitoring. Sometimes it's more focused on, hey, we got to get a mobile solution with Lori's to go ahead and help with the no-show rates in the west side of Chicago. What gets in this story sometimes is, and again, I'm okay with this. From a payer perspective, we should be in the background, right? But how we're supporting the organizations to help members and patients have that brand identity with the providers, that's important, right? But where we can help with the back end of the data components, help with the infrastructure build, and then think about those payment terms. So when we look at value-based care, and we've got FQHCs that are doing full risk in some cases now, they've got gold carding. They don't have prior authorization issues. They've built that. They've got that bi-directional exchange. We have people embedded on site in our hospitals that do community rounds with Mount Sinai today. That's helping with discharge planning. That's helping ensure after they leave the hospital, they're going to the FQHCs to get the care that they need. So there's a whole care delivery component of how we have to think about where managed care fits in. I think what you're hearing from all of us today is whether it's the FQHC side or the CCBHC side on behavioral health or the hospital side, we've got to guide members to leverage the right part of what can be a closed loop system sometimes to guide them to the right, right entities, right? And think about that. Medicaid today is open access. People can go to whichever provider they want to go to. There is redundancy in services that happen. That is not value-based care. That is not promoting the cost economics to get to a better point. We have to think about how do we help our members guide that. It's not about who's on your card for an open, on the Aetna card, who's your provider. That's not it. No, we got to figure out what the needs are. And for our population today, I mean, our number one driver is behavioral health conditions. Number 2, 3, 4 is your chronic conditions. And if they're going to University of Chicago to the ER, that is not what appropriate care utilization looks like. So this is where I would think about how do we take all of these incredible assets And as we're looking at care delivery by the community focus, we think about, well, we brought in Oak Street today. How is Oak Street taking care of that really high-risk elderly population and maybe working with St. Bernard's and their Center of Aging organization? How does a transformation collaborative not be redundant with managed care today? We share data with healthcare transformation collaboratives all the time. But now we know today from our care coordination services, we've got 5 to 10% of our population in care coordination. What about the other group that we can't find? That's where the hospitals, FQs, HTCs have the right local resources to find them. So it involves us thinking about this from a member perspective, and that's obvious. But we don't put all the pieces together to say, well, what are the behavioral health needs? What are the physical health needs? What does the EMR say? What does the claims data say to actually get them to the provider? To actually get them to not be in the ER and maybe, hey, Aetna, get them an air conditioning machine because they'll stay out of the ER. I will definitely pay for that air conditioning machine for that member. But simple things like pharmacy, right? James just talked about how there's been a strain on retail. 4 months ago, we ended up actually offering home delivery to every Aetna Medicaid member today for pharmacy. That's like a first in the nation program, and it's so obvious. Amazon Prime does it. We do it for all. I get my medication from Amazon Prime. Don't tell CVS that. But bottom line is, you think about how we can change the model of care. Now it's not about having Walgreens or CVS or a Jewel Osco or a Walmart or an independent in your local West Side district. It's actually, hey, we can get that medication delivered. And there's a few exceptions there, but we're actually seeing more uptick in our pharmacy desert areas where we have pharmacy deserts, quote unquote. Think about our homeless shelters, and we think about, hey, let's install a kiosk where members can get access to telehealth services for maybe a PCP group. Now we're thinking about a different way of how our community health centers focus and work. So part of this has been like, when I look at the AI components, I look at technology, managed care is bringing a lot of things like Maven and bringing in doula service, lactation consultant service. I mean, we are one of the worst in the nation for maternal morbidity and mortality. That is not a University of Chicago problem to solve. That is us thinking about, well, how do we make sure that our OB-GYNs are working with doulas and lactation consultants and midwives to get to better health outcomes? And that is where we have to think about, well, managed care can bring those solutions to augment and support solutions that are in there, but that doesn't happen without working with your local CBOs, your hospital systems, and your providers. And that's where the framework and how we redesign our healthcare delivery system needs to be. And it needs to be, and the provider mechanism of value-based contracts, and it's not a one-size-fits-all. It's not what we do for Lawndale today looks very different than what we do for Sinai. And it's got to be a custom approach, but we've got to think about that in this broader closed-loop referral system on how do patients have choice, but also make sure they're working underneath that. If we have every member on the south side of Chicago going to Prentice at Northwestern for every delivery, and they're not utilizing the other systems, and they're not really working in that closed-loop network, we're also not able to think about that referral pathway. Some of that's a policy change. Some of that's a way we navigate our systems. Some of that is utilization management, and some of that is definitely value-based contracting. So we've got the right assets in Chicago. We've got a lot of great federal innovative programs here, a lot of great entities here, looking at behavioral health, looking at physical health. Yeah, it's integration, but it's getting those piece parts at the community levels to really change that.
And it's not like we haven't seen this be done at the community level or observe the outcomes. It just doesn't fit in the current structure of the system. So a key consideration here, I think, is that the state is going to have to create the regulatory environment through which things like this can scale, and there needs to be some standardization to it. This cannot be if you've seen one MCO, you've seen one MCO. If you've seen one MCO FQHC contract, you've seen one contract between those parties. We need some ability to standardize that. Back to James's point earlier, these guys are already exhausted managing a Byzantine, complex patchwork of other contracts, federal programs, HTC programs. That is not the highest and best use of Dr. James Brooks or Dr. Ngozi Ezike or anybody else that's working in these communities. It's about community care, not administrative bureaucracy. But I know we talk a lot about this. What would you add?
Well, just that what Ruchil just described is exactly how the efficiencies play out in other states across the country, where managed care, community-based organizations, hospitals, FQs, providers are together planning, developing a system of care that is inclusive of all these components, where you really have seamless coordination of care across these respective stakeholders. That's not happening in Illinois. It hasn't happened from the beginning of managed care in Illinois. And that's been a significant gap. And what we have seen is we've seen the creation of other ways in which we split this Medicaid dollar. The transformation projects they're doing a good job with what it is that they're required to do. They have the opportunity to create this coordination with healthcare providers and CBOs, and some are actually working with managed care organizations and doing some value-based work or beginning to do some value-based work. So they're kind of in the middle and able to create systems of care coordination across all of these providers and put care coordinators and all of the collaborators that are participating in their respective transformation project, and they're able to execute on community on population health programs across providers within their collaboration, and they're able to leverage the providers and the expertise that they have, like Sinai and training community health workers, University of Chicago and training community health workers. They're able to do that, and that's really helpful. But they're doing it for their slice of the pie. And what that's doing is that's slicing that Medicaid dollar even more, because now you've got managed care who can actually do all of this, and now you have the transformation projects who are also doing it now too. So you're taking that Medicaid dollar, and this is why I said to you this is the weakest Medicaid dollar in the entire country, is because you've taken it and you've sliced it and sliced it and sliced it. If we had a better organized, better coordinated, more efficient healthcare delivery system that brings everybody to the table, all the stakeholders to the table, having each one of them play their respective role effectively, then you can control the cost of care. And this is what we're going to have to do in Illinois. If Medicaid gets cut, there's no more free-for-all, everybody do whatever you want to do. We're going to have to be more coordinating in what we're doing. And we cannot afford, because the dollar is going to be less, and the decisions that will be made with fewer dollars are going to harm people. So it is critically important that what Ruchil just described, that we do, and we start planning for that right now in the state of Illinois, so that we can prepare for whatever's coming down the pike for us, because we do know it's coming down.
Just to build on that, I think on the member level, you've got to think about that. So if we think about the member experience across the FQHC, the hospital system, the economics are simple. Keeping them out of the ER inpatient setting, thinking about how we get them to a PCP, not multiple PCPs, and getting that member their medication leads to better outcomes in care, creates the economics for a value-based savings model that can be shared amongst all of the entities involved, right? And that is what creates a fully capitated, a fully risk arrangement. It's data, it's staffing, but it is coordination amongst those entities at that local community level to really make the dent. And I think it's happened in other states, to Brenda's point. There are managed care entities that are doing that work today. But again, it is very PCP oriented, because that's the easiest way to go ahead and say it's at this level. We've got to think about how the hospitals fit into that more broadly.
Run around third base. Mark?
Oh, gosh, I know we have so little time here, but one of the questions that we were asked to think about was, like, what can the General Assembly or HFS or the governor do to improve the safety net system? And I want to talk just very briefly for the permanent record here about what those three entities, including my friend here in the front row, can do to improve the behavioral health safety net. And these are just recommendations, though 40 years ago when I was in ACT UP Chicago, these wouldn't have been recommendations, these would have been demands. But I guess I'm too old now to demand anything, but at 21 it was sure fun to demand that folks do stuff. So really quickly, because I know we have to wrap up, but I just want to get these out there because I think everybody needs to know this. This is what we need to do immediately to save the behavioral health safety net in Illinois. We have to fully support what are called Certified Community Behavioral Health Clinics, or CCBHCs. There are 19 demonstration projects in the state of Illinois now, 2 of which are thresholds, but 2 of threshold CCBHCs are not covered by this. We have to make sure that every certified community behavioral health center that has funding from HRSA right now, from SAMHSA, is part of an Illinois expansion program. We have to increase Medicaid rates, no matter what is happening with Medicaid, in very targeted ways. I know there's going to be some cuts and maybe even to thresholds, probably to thresholds, but there are certain Medicaid rates, especially for community outreach, that have to be increased in this fiscal year, and I know that we can do it. The state is merging the mental health and substance use prevention and recovery. I think it's super. We have to make sure that this merger is more than a merger on paper, but that it really makes sense for the organizations and most importantly for the clients that we serve. And while these two departments are being merged in Illinois, we have to figure out how they really merge, if that's not the right word, merger, with HFS. Because we have one authority that is the authority, DMH, and then one that is the payer. And there is not enough good cooperation and collaboration there. There's a thing called the Behavioral Health Administrative Task Force that's happening in Illinois right now to reduce the administrative burden that is killing us, financially and otherwise. And these recommendations, I hope, are going to come out soon, and the state has to adopt them wholeheartedly. We have to eliminate prior authorization for behavioral health and probably all Medicaid. I don't know how to exactly do this, but we have to do it. We employ 5 people full-time at the cost of hundreds of thousands of dollars to do prior auths, 98% of which are approved. So all this work to approve what is going to be approved anyway. This money should be going into client services and not into prior auths. 7,000 hours a year in prior auths. Can you imagine if we spent 7,000 hours more with our clients? I have so many other things here, but I'm going to just hold back in the respect of time. And so that's on the permanent record, and these are my demands. Thank you.
Yes, I just want to add quickly, and I know we're at time. We're going to wind this down in just a second. I was going to ask the question to Mark, and just the framing I was going to give it a moment ago, just to make sure I double down on this, is that the most, categorically, indisputably, the most complex organ in the human body is the human brain. Like, that is the predicate for everything that happens with every other vital bodily system we have over the course of our lives. You can trace it to behavioral things, genetic things, whatever the case may be. Such a seminal part of this journey we need to take is creating more, better, streamlined, connected, contiguous behavioral health resources through the city, particularly in these underserved communities, but also in every community. Like, this is the level of human stress that is kind of weighing on all of us right now, and the lack of resources we have here, that is existential in its own right. Dr. Brooks, I'll go to you for a closing comment. And
10 seconds. Let me serve as all of your CEOs, right? CEO right now. I'm your CEO, and that's the Chief Encouragement Officer. In these times, be not weary in well-doing, but in due season, you will reap if you faint not. Amen.
Amen.
Fully understand that this should have been a 5-hour discussion. I fully understand that there are incredible questions and comments that came through. I fully understand and recognize that we're scratching the surface in 105 minutes worth of programming. I apologize for that. It's difficult sometimes to balance these things with time commitments and getting people together and the like. Let me say in closing that the things we've talked about today are not sitting in a vacuum. They're not sitting in the ether. These are not things that are like, oh, cute little conversation, we're going to go on with our days. There are active things happening on these fronts right now. There is incredible power in this room. If I would just leave 2 challenges with each of you. Challenge number 1 is any thoughts, considerations, proposals, things that you're thinking about. I would really invite you to share that with anybody up here on the dais, or send it to myself or Megan Phillip directly. This is not one of those like cookie cutter, hey, we care, please tell us what you think. Like, for real, there is active work going on, and it can help to influence and shape it. I would value it deeply. Number 2, every time I've walked away from a meeting like this, I'm like, oh, what do I do? Like, this is all so big, right? Do you want to go back to the magic of storytelling, right? The things happening around us, they are big, and they're bigger than me. They're bigger than any person up here. They're bigger than any one of us in this room. They're not bigger than all of us. They're not bigger than all of us throughout the city. And our ability to recruit, to evangelize about the importance of this stuff, make an altruistic argument, make an economic productivity argument, make whatever argument you want, but make an argument and make it in service and defense of communities that have seen 70 years worth of divestiture and are seeing Walgreens and Whole Foods pull out, and to the point that was made a little earlier, cannot stand the existential blow of seeing an FQHC, CMHC, CCBHC, Safety Net Hospital, or whomever close down. There is a real opportunity. It is bleak. It is a difficult environment that we're in, but I'll go back to, it was either Rushil or Dr. Brooks that said, we have what we need to do this. We need a lot more information than we have now. A lot of things are going to play out. We need to organize and pursue this kind of a grand bargain between these parties, get capital moving in this space, and create a sustainable system. We can do it. It's the time. So thank you all for being here this morning. Thank you all for being up on stage.
Thank you. And another round for everybody up here. David for pulling double duty, Dr. Brooks, Rushil, Brenda, Mark, without folks that are leading the charge.
Everybody leaves. So our esteemed state representative Lindsey LaPointe and Karina Villa, who's not with us today, are sponsoring a bill that would dramatically change the way private insurance coverage covers mental health services in Illinois. It will increase the workforce, all the counselors and therapists and social workers who are not part of networks right now. With this bill, when it passes and is signed by the governor in May or June, will dramatically increase the payments for these essential workers, will make the networks more robust so people don't have to pay hundreds of thousands, collectively millions of dollars out of pocket. So you're going to hear a lot more about this bill. There was an op-ed in the Sun-Times yesterday by our dear friend here, Lindsey and Karina. This is game-changing. It's not about the safety net per se, but it impacts the safety net. Because if people don't have this kind of insurance coverage, they will utilize the safety net system if they don't utilize anything at all. So I just want to thank Lindsey for her leadership on this, tirelessly working for 4 years, and we're going to make it happen this year. Thank you.